Hey there, Godly Adventurers. We're going to be doing some different things this time. Firstly, welcome back to the channel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to simultaneously be recording the YouTube video and the podcast audio at the same time. So effectively, I will be doubling up on this one. But the video will obviously go to the YouTube channel so you can actually watch me doing what I'm doing. And my voice obviously is going to be recorded through the audio, which I'll upload to the podcast because through this new app I'm using called Riverside, that's something I can do now. So yeah, it's nice just seeing what new things I can do as technology improves and we move over to different apps and all that. So yeah, it gives me more of a platform and more opportunities. So it's really exciting. So that's number one change. Number two change is I'm going to finally start this series I think I've been working on for more than a year and just haven't gotten around to. And it's going to be called the Character Focus series. And that's basically what I'm going to do is I'm just going to focus rather on a particular topic or a book or whatever I normally do where I sort of pick it apart. I am going to talk about a particular person in the Character Focus series and just go into their history and who they are and see what we can take from their life. I'm going to start with biblical figures first. I've got a few scripts written up for people from the Bible, and then we can look at outside sources like book characters, movie characters, whatever. And feel free to shoot through your suggestions to me if you have any good ideas. But I've already got a bit of a running list I can work with. So the person we're going to be looking at is the Old Testament figure called Daniel, who you might know from the book in the Old Testament called Daniel. So let's look at who this guy is. Well, he's an Israelite who, around the time of the exile into Babylon, he was a young, gifted, and handsome youth. If I look down, I'm actually just reading the script, by the way. And what I think is especially interesting about him is he grew up in the environment of Babylon, where they would have had a very different culture, especially religiously, to Israel. But he's very good at sort of keeping upright in his faith. So over his lifetime, God actually reveals the contents and meanings of dreams to him. You might remember, like Joseph in Egypt. Daniel is his agent for doing that in Babylon. And we'll get to that a bit later, why that is, again, so significant. And so what it means is during his service to King Nebuchadnezzar, he was able to give interpretation of dreams, as well as getting some really cryptic visions of like future figures and events, which an angel will give interpretation of. And that continues. His service to the higher-ups continues in the reign of Belshazzar, which was one of Nebuchadnezzar's descendants, and then Darius and Cyrus, who belonged to conquering empires that did eventually topple Babylon. But of course, we're going to get to that. So that's who Daniel was, God's agent in this foreign kingdom, who God uses for his glory because he does like to pick the upright, like say the Virgin Mary or Joseph, people who he knows, have got a good heart for him. He can use them in ways and places that we might not expect, and that just goes to show that, righteousness is important, faith is important, but also, we can't really put a limitation on when, where, and how God's going to work, can we? God does as he wills, and I suppose the wonderful thing is seeing the amazing ways he's going to use us in given situations that we don't know how to predict. So that's who Daniel is. I'm going to just go into his history in the Bible. As I said, he was among one of the exiled children of Israel during the days of King Nebuchadnezzar. And because of their corrupt kings, they had a long history of corrupt kings, and God had promised that if they were going to live in apostasy and covenantal unfaithfulness, that there would be particular curses and consequences ascribed to that. This is something Daniel does understand and take seriously, but unfortunately, I suppose the kings and the people, for the most part, didn't take it seriously enough. And the day came when they had to be punished for this. So what happens is when Daniel and his friends are in Babylon, the king gives the orders to his chief eunuch that they're going to pick out a few young Israelites, sons of nobles and royals and whatever, to be trained in their own literature and language. And among them were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And you might go, I haven't heard of those other three people before. Oh, you would have, but they were given different names. So moving into Babylon, they were renamed Belteshazzar, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, which would be names that related to Babylonian gods and that kind of thing. There's a bit of a way of separating them from their Israelite heritage and faith and sort of what's the word? Basically inserting them into Babylonian culture. I know the word I'm trying to think of. I can't think of the word I'm looking for. Although what I think is interesting is in the Bible, Daniel is pretty much almost entirely only referred to as Daniel and not Belteshazzar, whereas all of his three friends are pretty much only referred to by their Babylonian names from that point on. So that's interesting. I'm sure that was a deliberate choice by the author. In a characteristic show of faith, rather than accepting the king's portions of meat and wine, which was probably likely to not defile themselves, since it was probably offered to false gods as a sacrifice, they ask, can we be given beans and water to consist on? Which, as a vegetarian who doesn't drink, that diet would suit me just fine. Anyway, so the chief eunuch is nervous about this, but he gives them a 10-day tasting period to see the health benefits of said diet, which turned out to be even more positive than the original one. And so they were just given vegetables from that point forward. So like with Joseph in Egypt, where he's used to further God's plan and show God's glory to Pharaoh, God gives these other four boys a great capacity, Daniel having the amazing spiritual gift of understanding visions and dreams. And all four of them were just given knowledge and skill in all literature and wisdom. So after their training, the king interviewed them and found that they're more worthy they found them more than worthy, and they were allowed to serve him. In fact, they were found 10 times better than the magicians and astrologers in his service in matters of wisdom and understanding. Anyway, so the day comes when the king has a dream that he can't remember, and he's troubled by this and wants to be told the dream, and then also the explanation of the dream. So the wise men can't do this. They can't tell him what his dream was and then interpret it for him. So in what we find to be a very characteristic trait of Nebuchadnezzar, he threatens death on all of the wise men if they can't meet his desires, right? But God gives Daniel the ability to give the king the explanation he wants. I'm going to read it out to you now. You, O king, were watching, and behold, a great image. This great image, whose splendor was excellent, stood before you, and its form was awesome. The image's head was part of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. You watched while a stone was cut out without hands, which struck the image on the feet of iron and clay and broke them to pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were crushed together and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. The wind carried them away, so that no trace of them was found. The stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. This is the dream. Now we will tell you the interpretation of it before the king. You, O king, are the King of Kings, because he would have been an empire where he had other kings that were subject to him. So it's a pretty big deal, almost a bit of an emperor actually. Now the God of heaven, who is even more the King of Kings, has given you a kingdom, power, strength, and glory. And wherever the children of men dwell, or the beasts of the field, or the birds of heaven, he has given them to your hand, and has made you ruler over them. You are the head of gold. But after you shall rise another kingdom, inferior to yours, and then a third kingdom of bronze shall rule over all the earth. And the fourth kingdom shall be strong like iron, inasmuch as iron breaks in pieces and shatters everything. And like iron that crushes, that kingdom will break into pieces and crush all others. Whereas you saw the feet and toes partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, that kingdom shall be divided. Yet the strength of the iron shall be in it, just as you saw the iron mixed with the ceramic clay. And as the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly fragile. As you saw the iron mixed with ceramic clay, they will mingle with the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, just as iron doesn't mix with clay. And the days of these kings, the Lord of heaven shall set up a kingdom which will never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people. It shall break in pieces and consume these other kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. Inasmuch as you saw that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it broke in pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God has made it known to the king that what will come to pass after this. This dream is certain, and its interpretation is sure. Full stop. So Nebuchadnezzar gives God glory for this, and he acknowledges God and decides that he's going to promote Daniel. And at Daniel's petition, he also does that for his 3 friends as well. And he has another troubling dream, which he ignorantly gives all the other wise men and magicians, etc., the chance to explain. He's got a bit of a short memory, I suppose. Before that, Daniel has to come forward and interpret that dream as well. So the dream goes, I was looking, and behold, a tree in the midst of the earth, and its height was great. And the tree grew and became strong. Its height reached to the heavens, and it could be seen to the ends of all the earth. Its leaves were lovely, its fruit abundant, and in it was food for all. The beasts of the field found shade in it, the birds of the heavens dwelt in its branches, and all flesh was fed from it. I saw in the visions of my head while I was on my bed, and there was a watcher, a holy one, coming down from the heaven. He cried aloud and said thus, Chop down the tree and cut off its branches, strip off its leaves and scatter its fruit, let the beasts get out from under it, and the birds from its branches. Nevertheless, leave the stump and the roots in the earth, bound with a band of iron and bronze, in the tender grass of the field, let it be wet with the dew of heaven, and let him graze with the beasts, and on the grass of the earth. Let his heart be changed from that of a man, let him be given the heart of a beast. And let 7 times pass over him, and this decision is by the decree of the watchers, and the sentence by the word of the holy ones, in order that the living may know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men, gives it to whomever he will, and sets it over the lowest of men. And sets over it the lowest of men. So, that's a little bit cryptic, isn't it? But that's okay, because we're about to get the interpretation right now. The tree that you saw, which grew and became strong, whose height reached to the heavens and could be seen by all the earth, whose leaves were lovely and fruit abundant, in which there was food for all, under which the beasts of the field dwelt, and in whose branches the birds of heaven had their home. It is you, O King, who have grown and become strong. For your greatness has grown and reaches to the heavens, and your dominion to the end of the earth. Because he would have been, like maybe the greatest superpower of his time at that moment. And inasmuch as the king saw a watcher, a holy one, coming down from heaven and saying, "Chop down the tree and destroy it, but leave its stump and roots in the earth, bound with a band of iron and bronze in the tender grass of the field, let it be wet with the dew of heaven, and let him graze with the beasts of the field until 7 times pass over him." This is the interpretation, O king, and this is the decree of the Most High, which has come upon my lord the king. They shall drive you from men, your dwelling place will be with the beasts of the field, and they will make you eat grass like oxen. They shall wet you with the dew of heaven, and 7 times, or 7 years, shall pass over you, till you know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men, and gives it to whoever he chooses. And inasmuch as they gave the command to leave the stump and roots of the tree, your kingdom shall be assured to you, after you come to know that heaven rules. Therefore, O king, let my advice be acceptable to you. Break off your sins by being righteous, and your iniquities by showing mercy to the poor. Perhaps there may be a lengthening of your prosperity. And the fulfillment does come to pass. In a nutshell, he goes mad a year later, is driven out of his kingdom, lives like a wild beast for 7 years. Afterwards, he returns to his senses, and God restores his kingdom once he renounces his pride and exalts God instead. So that's kind of the end of Nebuchadnezzar's part in Daniel's story. I've deliberately kind of rushed over that because I think Nebuchadnezzar is such an interesting person in his own right that I'm actually going to do a separate character focus on him. But for now, we're just going to focus on Daniel, because he is probably one of my favorite people in the whole Bible, because Daniel is just one of the best books in the Bible, let's be real. And so we're just going to continue on with Daniel's story for now. So after Nebuchadnezzar's reign, Belshazzar reigns after that. And during this time, Daniel would receive futuristic visions, dated the 1st and the 3rd years of Belshazzar's time. After Belshazzar crosses a line, by using the temple artifacts taken from Jerusalem for his feast, which, would have been set aside in a holy treasury or something back in the temple. He disrespects God by effectively using them for one of his feasts, actually using them to drink wine out of, and maybe do some orgy or sacrifice or something, I don't know. Anyway, so after doing that, a hand appears and writes on the wall. He is terrified, as I think we might be, if it's just a random, disembodied hand starts writing stuff on a wall. Daniel's called to explain, as it is remembered how he gave answers to Nebuchadnezzar's dreams in the past. So he's actually got a bit of a reputation for this now. And the writing said, "Mene, mene, tekel, upharsin." This is the interpretation of each word. Mene, God has numbered your kingdom and finished it. Tekel, you've been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Peres, your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and Persians. It was fulfilled that very night, and Darius began his rule over Babylon, slaying Belshazzar in the process. See, Daniel actually sticks around longer than these rulers, actually. There's almost a bit of a conveyor belt with these guys, and Daniel just stays in office. It's pretty interesting. So then we move into the Medo-Persian reign, which, as we might remember from the dream, if we go back a little bit, this is the chest and arms of silver that follows the head of gold. So Daniel would have some more major visions of futuristic events, including Jesus' arrival, some of which took a major mental and physical toll on him. Aware of the fulfillment of days spoken by Jeremiah, who was a prophet around the time of the exiles happening, he acknowledges the sin of Israel and that caused the downfall, and pleads with God to forgive them and bring restoration. This is a type of confessional prayer. I do talk about the 5 types of prayer in my episode on prayer, which is episode 3. So you can look at that specifically about the types of prayer, one of which is confession, and Daniel does do a nice long one in the second half of the book of Daniel, I believe. So Darius would like and trust Daniel very much. He's a pretty smart guy and seems to be very trustworthy, so why not? And so he gives him lots of authority, much like Nebuchadnezzar would do in his time. He was one of 3 governors, ruling over 120 satraps, provincial governors, and even then did so well that Darius thought he would set him over the whole kingdom, as an excellent spirit was in him. Again, notice the parallels between Daniel and Joseph. In a foreign kingdom, but just keeps getting promoted because of how well he does things. He, like Jesus, gained undeserved hatred from the rest of the leaders under him. They wanted him out of the way, yet he wasn't corrupt or inept, so they couldn't really bring a charge against him to get him demoted or kicked out. So they set a trap for him about his devotion to God, tricking the king into making a law that for 30 days no one could petition a god, only himself. Once he did this, it was irreversible, according to their law. Daniel, as usual, wasn't one to compromise his faith and just continued to pray at his window facing Jerusalem. So his enemies spied on him, caught him in the act, dobbed him in, and in spite of Darius' efforts to deliver Daniel, there was nothing he could legally do to save him from the punishment. And so he got thrown into the den of lions. Yet the next day, Darius returns to check, and Daniel is alive and unharmed. God had sent an angel to close the lions' mouths. Darius brings him out and casts his enemies into the pit instead. Darius then makes a new decree. To all peoples, nations, languages that dwell on the earth, because, again, head of an empire, sees over a lot of different cultures, peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom, men must tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God and steadfast forever. His kingdom is the one that shall not be destroyed. Note actually back to Nebuchadnezzar's dream, where that final kingdom, the stone cut from the mountain, probably does actually refer to God's kingdom specifically. And his dominion shall endure to the end. He delivers and rescues. He works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth, who has delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. Yeah, so true. Hallelujah. So God once again used Daniel to glorify himself in these foreign lands and to these foreign kings, through Daniel's performance, gifts, faith, and deliverances. And he continued to prosper through the reign of Darius and of Cyrus. Isn't that just amazing? So now that we've gone through Daniel's personal story, what are the takeaways we can take from it? I just want to make a little note here that you might have noticed that despite the fact that the second half of the book focuses a lot on dreams and interpretations, I've pointed out when they happened, but I didn't really explain them very much. And that's because they are super duper cryptic, and I didn't want to try to figure out what they meant to explain them to you, which is why I kind of just glanced over them and mainly just talked about his personal history. Because unfortunately some books like yeah, some books like Daniel and Revelation, their visions are just too hard to figure out. So what are the takeaways? Well, Daniel has great faith. He shows true loyalty and religion by his constant prayers, whether daily, for confession and petition, or even for deliverance in bad situations. And whenever he's faced with a choice between God and God's will, or anything else, he stands firm in God, even though he lived in a pagan land. And you might remember back to my Armor of God video, where people like Daniel, because they guard their heart with the breastplate of righteousness, it means that even though they go out into places where it might not be cool to worship the God of Israel, he's in the opposite of an echo chamber and a safe space. He's in a place where there would be a lot of spiritual corruption. Because his heart is guarded, he stays righteous, even though he's in an unusual place. The kings liked him, though, because he was a hard-working man who gave his work and office the respect it deserved. Again, see back to my other video on types of workers. Bosses love people who come to work, have a good work ethic. They don't need to constantly be reminded what to do or told why they're there. They show up and give 110%. Employers love that kind of stuff. He's gifted, and God would use these gifts for his glory. Daniel would often lean on God and give God the glory when seeking and practicing gifts. He never actually took the credit for himself. And he's humble as he confesses the sins of Israel as his own, because, again, he's part of Israel. And he just would have had the self-awareness to go, well, I have to take some responsibility for that too, don't I? So, and what I sort of thought was interesting reading through this is God tends to do foreshadowings or forerunners of Christ. And I actually noticed that there are a lot of parallels between Joseph, Daniel, and Jesus, in that they end up in strange places and they do go through some hard times. Joseph goes to prison, Daniel gets sent to the den of lions, Jesus is crucified and goes into the tomb. But they come out of it in really, into a really good situation. And despite the fact that they might not necessarily belong to that kingdom, I mean, Jesus came down from heaven, put aside his glory to dwell in the realm of man, despite the fact that he's a heavenly being. Daniel and Joseph, despite the fact that they're righteous Israelites, end up in these foreign lands of Egypt and Babylon, where they worship other gods and don't necessarily know the God of Israel, but they stand firm. And God, through his wonders, uses those men to work wonders. And they do his will, and he receives the glory. And because of, and God actually uses that to establish not just his will, but his future kingdom to bring the Israelites into Egypt, so then they can go out and settle in the promised land later on. Or Daniel, eventually there was a time when the Israelites were allowed to leave Babylon and come back and settle in Jerusalem again. And then Jesus, of course, well, we know that he really starts to establish the church in a heavenly kingdom as well through his time on earth. So it's interesting just to see those parallels and those sort of foreshadowings of what God's going to do with Jesus. And if you read Matthew, this is a very telling thing, how Matthew often constantly uses scripture from the Old Testament times to go, see, this was a setup. God was setting up what he was going to do with Jesus, because a lot of people would have doubted, like, how do we know this guy's really the Son of God? And Matthew goes, well, look at all these things that happened and see how it compares to my eyewitness report of who Jesus is and what he does, right? So when you read God's word with an open mind, you can sort of see, there is a lot of setup for things like that. So I think Daniel and his three friends are very noteworthy people. I mean, they're only sort of in one book, and it's only about 12 chapters, but I just don't get sick of rereading Daniel over and over because of just how much character, like strength of character, they have. And so I keep referencing them in other talks. And one of my all-time favorite chapters in the whole Bible is Daniel chapter 3, where Nebuchadnezzar wants Daniel's three friends to bow down and worship an image he's made. And they're like, no, because we worship the God of Israel, who can deliver us from you, and even if he chooses not to, we're not going to become apostate. And that awesome response just is so inspiring and mind-blowingly cool. So if you haven't read Daniel, give it a shot. And as I said, you can also look at other videos where I've referenced Daniel and his friends in the Types of Workers video, the one on prayer, and the one on the armor of God. And I hope that these takeaways really do help you to be an amazing pillar, an amazing witness, and to just keep being faithful even when the situation seems unusual, just to keep serving and just to keep being a witness. And God can use you to touch even the most unlikely people in the most unlikely ways. I hope you've enjoyed the character focus series beginning. Hopefully we'll get to do a lot more of these. Hopefully we get to take a lot more out of them. I already have people in mind. Like I said, Nebuchadnezzar, I reckon he's going to be number 2 that I do. But if you have any ideas, please shoot them to me either through the podcast email. You can also get onto my Facebook and talk to me through there. Or if you're actually watching this video on YouTube, feel free to leave in the comment who you think we could talk about. So, yeah, that's I suppose that's all for today. Thank you for tuning in. I'm glad I finally, managed to record this in November. So hopefully this is up before the end of the month, and so we have at least one more entry for this month before we move on to December and start looking forward to Christmas and New Year's and all that kind of stuff. All right. God bless you all. I hope things are going well. And even if they don't seem to be, just trust in God, because God's got your best interest at heart, and it does get better. All right. Ciao for now.